now, an ITV News Meridian election special with Fred Dinenage and Sangeeta Bhabara.
Good evening. What a day. What an election.
An extraordinary 24 hours in politics and surprises in the south. On the programme tonight. Portsmouth South goes Labour for the very first time. Brighton Kemptown goes Red too. It's still Tory heartland, but with some Conservative casualties.
It's a historic vote tonight, and I'm very, very excited to serve people in Portsmouth.
Who's new and who's through? Some new faces and a new Tory MP for the Isle of Wight. Southampton itching though, 3 recounts, 31 votes in it.
The game changer, the under-25s who answered Corbyn's call to vote. Did the dementia tax put some voters off?
And from Dorset to Sussex, Wiltshire to Hampshire, who is your MP tonight? And what now at number 10? We're there, live. Good evening to you. Tonight, the winners feel like losers and the losers feel like winners. Theresa May is still Prime Minister, but her authority has been badly damaged.
The MP for Maidenhead wanted a big mandate and a huge majority. She got neither.
Across our region, Tory heartland, of course, Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens were celebrating some spectacular victories.
Mrs May can only govern now with the help of Unionist MPs from Northern Ireland.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a government that can provide certainty and lead Britain forward at this critical time for our country.
Across the ITV Meridian region, still plenty of blue. Of course, this was the political map in 2015, but today there have been changes that were not predicted. Labour and Lib Dem gains.
What we do know was that there was a huge increase in voter turnout. Our political correspondent Phil Hornby is live in Downing Street for us now. Phil, Theresa May still living in that house behind you, but only just. How long can she survive?
Well, this was a terrible night for the Conservatives, which nobody saw coming. Tory MPs I spoke to earlier in the week were convinced they were going to walk this election, but what Mrs May has done is voluntarily surrender a majority. And as you say, she's had to cobble together a deal with the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland to stay in power.
Phil, Brexit, student loans, the older vote, all contributed to this result. What lessons will she have learnt?
I can't tell you really, because when she made that speech outside number 10, we played a little clip of it a moment ago, she didn't even acknowledge the election results. She didn't even acknowledge what had happened last night. And some people thought that was very strange, almost as if she was in some kind of denial. But yes, all the issues towards the end of the campaign, whether it was police cuts, tuition fees, whatever it was, all seemed to go in Labour's favour and against Mrs May.
Phil, in the last election across our region, 800,000 people voted for UKIP. So not all of those votes went to the Tories.
No, the expectation was the vast majority would go to the Tories, but it seems quite a few went to Labour. And that partly explains why it was such a bad result for the Tories and such an unexpectedly good one for Jeremy Corbyn.
Phil, thanks for now.
OK, now though, let's look at some of the night's main stories.
Born and bred in Portsmouth, Labour's Steve Morgan saw off Tory Flick Drummond, who'd been in charge for just 2 years.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, we ran a really positive campaign about public services in Portsmouth, about the future of QA Hospital, about the future of local schools, offering people hope.
And there was double joy in Brighton and Hove for Labour. Brighton Kemptown was a marginal seat, but Lloyd Russell Moyle won with a majority of almost 10,000.
We were able to inspire people of a message of hope, a message where we said that things could be different.
Earlier in the evening, Green Party leader Caroline Lucas gave us this reaction to the exit polls.
Theresa May went to the country to get an even bigger majority for her mandate for this extreme Brexit that she's been pursuing. And if these polls are right, she doesn't have that mandate, and that's incredibly important.
The exit polls were right. Caroline Lucas doubling her majority in Brighton Pavilion and saying she'll campaign for a rethink on Brexit. Across the country, the fight for power came down to two parties, the Conservatives and Labour. And that was reflected here. In the Southampton test, Labour's Alan Whitehead increased his majority. While in Southampton Itchen, the Conservatives held on, but only just. It took 3 recounts, and in the end, the former leader of Southampton City Council, Royston Smith, saw off the current leader, Labour's Simon Letts, by just 31 votes.
I'm very keen to work with the City Council, with him, to lobby for anything for Southampton that I can with ministers. So we'll work closely together on that. So I really feel for him. You know, I've been there before and lost by a handful, and now he's done the same.
Elsewhere in the south, it was the Conservatives cheering. In Eastleigh, an increased majority and a defiant Mims Davies.
I absolutely believe that Theresa May has been bold by calling this election. I don't think anyone believed it was ever going to be that landslide. And Jeremy Corbyn sold wonderful ideals to very many people. In fact, I'm surprised that unicorns weren't on the shopping list.
On the Isle of Wight and in Dorset, all the constituencies remain Conservative. But Labour's vote was up. So the south is still a Tory stronghold, but perhaps not as strong and stable as Theresa May thought it would be. Andrew Pate, ITV News.
So let's look further at what last night's result means for our region.
Well, here's how the south looked yesterday. Overnight, not much change, but a significant one. An extra patch of red at the bottom in the centre, a result that sent shockwaves throughout the Conservative Party. The loss of Portsmouth South, where Labour took the seat for the first time ever.
And we can talk to the new MP there now, Stephen Morgan. Stephen Morgan, congratulations. Labour has never been successful where you are. How have you done it?
Well, we ran a really successful campaign here in Portsmouth South, focusing on the issues that matter to local people, the future of our NHS, the future of local schools, making sure that they get the investment that they need. A really positive campaign that offered hope to local people. And as the candidate from here, I'm absolutely delighted to be elected as the MP for Portsmouth South.
And personally, is it time for Labour to put aside its divisions over Jeremy Corbyn and put the party first?
Well, the people of Portsmouth voted for me not to talk about personalities, but about policies. I've got a practical plan to make Portsmouth a better place to live, so that it's a place that's for the many, not just the privileged few. Jeremy led on a really successful manifesto and a really good campaign. He has my full support, and I look forward to working with him.
Portsmouth South MP Stephen Morgan, thank you. Right, time now for the first of our regional roundups for the south, so you can see what happened where you live, starting alphabetically with A for Aldershot.
A new face in Aldershot. After 20 years, Sir Gerald Howarth has stood down to make way for fellow Conservative Leo Doherty, who's increased his party's majority by 4.5%. Labour came second with a 13% increase in share. Nick Herbert returns as the Conservative MP for Arundel and South Downs, as does Maria Miller, who holds on for the Tories in Basingstoke. Conservative Nick Gibb keeps his seat in Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, and there's no change in Bournemouth. Tobias Elwood remains the Conservative MP in Bournemouth East, despite a 19% increase in the Labour vote. And Connor Burns holds on for the Tories in Bournemouth West, despite a similar Labour increase. But, as we've heard, it's all change in Brighton Kemp Town. It's a Labour gain from the Conservatives. Lloyd Russell Moyle comes in with the lead of almost 10,000 over the outgoing Conservative Simon Kirby. Voting turnout was 72.5%. Caroline Lucas has retained the only Green seat in the country, winning Brighton Pavilion. The Green co-leader has increased her share of the vote by 20% in the last 2 elections. There's another new face in Chichester. Gillian Keegan wins for the Conservatives, replacing Andrew Tyree, who stood down as the Tory MP after 20 years. In Christchurch, Christopher Chope returns for the Conservatives and has managed to increase his majority share by 10%. And in Crawley, just 3 parties stood. Henry Smith returns as the Conservative MP.
Well, as we've mentioned already, the game changer last night was the student vote.
Yes, it was indeed. Let's put it into perspective. In 2015, just over 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds went to their polling stations. This time around, it was almost double that.
Our social affairs correspondent Christine Alsford reports now on how the young vote affected the results overnight.
Their voices finally heard, they said. The young voters of the South celebrating today, like 23-year-old Catherine Lowe, thrilled that her vote counted, she said, as her MP turned from blue to red.
Great day, massively great day, absolutely. I woke up very happy and dancing.
Among first-time voters, there seemed to be only one way to go, like these students at City College in Southampton, some of whom helped swell Alan Whitehead's Labour majority.
There is the stuff like the university tuition fees being scrapped, because that's a lot of help to people my age.
Do you feel that the young people felt that Labour was speaking for them?
Yes, because they were thinking about the people of the many rather than the people of the few.
It's in towns and cities like this one where the high turnout among the young is thought to have made the most dramatic difference. Here, 20,000 undergraduates are eligible to vote, and last night Portsmouth South returned its first ever Labour MP. Why do you think it is that this time so many young people, and particularly students, turned out?
I think it's because we want to start to control our own future. We don't want it to be dictated by the older generation anymore.
No one I knew voted in the referendum, but like everybody wanted to vote this time, because I think everyone learnt from the referendum results, so everyone wanted to get involved this time.
We had iPads available for students going, look, here you go, you can register now. We had bright yellow T-shirts on, trying to get them sweets, cakes, you name it, we had it.
But Jeremy Corbyn's supporters say it was a manifesto of hope and optimism that really made the difference. Christine Osford, ITV News.
Well, that's just a snapshot of how our 18 to 24-year-olds voted, but what about the older generations?
Yes, did the dementia tax U-turn hailed as the election's biggest gaffe affect the Conservative vote? Mary Stanley has been investigating.
Many members of this Hampshire Bridge Club are loyal Conservative voters, but today left pondering if their leader played the wrong moves.
She should have not said what she did about some of her policies. She should have kept quiet, and she would have romped home.
I think she's one of the best people to lead the party, but unfortunately it was all about her rather than the party.
She's a little bit silly in some of the things she said for the older people, and Corbyn I don't consider a leader at all. I think he's all pie in the sky, although he seems to be attractive to the young people.
Jeremy Corbyn addressed huge rallies across the region. Theresa May preferred more intimate surroundings. It's just 2 days since Theresa May came here, her campaign already floundering. Criticism at her reluctance to join the leaders' debate, her lack of engagement with the public, and that U-turn over social care.
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
I think it went wrong when they put their manifesto out, to be honest. There's too many things in there that went, especially against the older voters.
Labour got the young people on the side, got the university students and everything else, and different point of view to ours. And I think that's where it went wrong.
Do you think people underestimated the young people's vote?
Yeah, absolutely.
The election has left many voters here feeling uncertain, worrying who now holds the strongest hand. Mary Stanley, ITV News.
Now for more local results, let's look at what happened in another part of the region from mid-Dorset and North Poole. The Conservatives hold on. Michael Tomlinson has gained an extra 5,000 votes compared to the 2015 election. It's true blue across the country as Simon Hoare returns as the Conservative MP in Dorset North, as does Richard Drax in South Dorset, and Conservative Oliver Letwin, who keeps his seat in Dorset West. Mims Davis holds on in Eastleigh and has increased her share of the vote. And it's a comfortable win for the Tories in Fareham, Suella Fernandez getting more than 50% of the vote. Caroline Dinenage returns as the Conservative MP for Gosport with more than 30,000 votes. And Anne Milton has retained her Conservative seat in Guildford. Ranil Jayawardena has a majority of more than 27,000 for the Tories in Hampshire North East. And in the northwest of Hampshire, Kit Malthouse has been re-elected for the Conservatives with a clear lead over Labour, who came second. Well, we've been asking for your views on the election on our Facebook page. Lisa Newell from Bognor Regis writes, I don't know whether to laugh or scream.
Samantha Ralston says, I don't understand why people think it's disgraceful. It's the rules. If Corbyn was to have needed to do the same, would it still have been disgraceful?
Eilish Subba, I hope I'm saying your name right, says our vote really doesn't matter, does it? Waste of everyone's time.
Jill Purchase says she should do the decent and honourable thing and resign. Thank you to you all for your comments.
So who is your MP and by how much did they win by? Let's get another regional roundup. We start with what happened in Havant.
Alan Mack has seen an 8% increase in the Conservative share of votes in Havant. And in Horsham, Jeremy Quinn also returns as the Conservative MP. A successful night for Labour MP Peter Kyle in Hove as he increases his share of votes by more than 20%. He now has a majority of more than 18,500. The Isle of Wight stays true blue, but with a new face. Bob Seeley replaces Andrew Turner, who stood down as Conservative MP after 16 years. The Tories and Labour increased their share of votes after the UKIP vote in 2015 fell by more than 18%. Lewis also remains Conservative. Maria Caulfield increases her share of votes by 11.5%. George Hollingbury returns as the Conservative MP for Meon Valley, winning 65% of the vote. Julian Lewis holds on for the Tories in New Forest East. And in New Forest West, Desmond Swain remains the Conservative MP. Labour saw a 16% increase. No change in Poole. Robert Sims for the Conservatives wins there, as does Penny Mordaunt in Portsmouth North with more than 50% of votes. But one of the shocks of the night was in Portsmouth South, where Labour ousted the Conservatives. Stephen Morgan, the new Labour MP, beating Flick Drummond by just over 1,500 votes, a 21% increase for Labour on 2015. Well, more local election results coming up, but if you've missed yours, they're on our website. Also there, see what happened when our reporter Nashreen Issa tried to get an interview with a losing Conservative candidate.
Well, let's get our final instalment of results for the South. We kick off with R for Romsey.
Conservative Caroline Noakes has retained her seat with a high turnout of almost 75%. Salisbury also stays Conservative, John Glenn the MP, despite a 10% increase in Labour votes. There were 3 recounts for Southampton Itchin, but Conservative Royston Smith has managed to cling on, beating Labour's Simon Letts by just 31 votes, the tightest win in the region. Southampton Test stays Labour with Alan Whitehead, but with an increased majority of 11,500 and a 66.8% turnout. Brexiteer Michael Gove safely keeps his Conservative seat in Surrey Heath. So does the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, despite a challenge from National Health Action and a high turnout of 77%. Nicholas Soames returns as Conservative MP and with a healthy majority in mid-Sussex. No change in the Sussex constituency of Wealdon. Nusgani returns as Conservative MP. So does Steve Bryan, winning for the Tories in Winchester. Tim Lawton remains the Conservative MP in East Worthing, and Shoreham, despite a 20% increase in Labour's share of the vote. And also no change in Worthing West. Peter Bottomley is back as the Conservative MP.
Well, millions woke up to today's election news and are still coming to terms with it. So what's the reaction and why did it happen?
Well, to find out, our transport correspondent Mike Pearce joined passengers on the commute from Brighton, where the Greens' Caroline Lucas increased her vote, as did Labour, winning an extra seat.
Not surprising then, on the train of shame, the one that's often late, never on time, many were pleased with the result.
7 this morning, and for Brighton's 36,000-strong army of commuters, the hung result was sinking in.
It's an alright decision. I think it was the second best decision. I would have preferred Corbyn to be in.
No, it's actually good. It's what most people expected, I think, so it's a good thing.
Corbyn showed he is a bit stronger than people thought.
On the train that was famously late every day for a year, the majority said the news was on track. But do bear in mind they voted in 2 Labour and a Green MP.
I am surprised because I thought Conservatives would win, but I'm very happy with the hung parliament because I voted Labour and Jezza.
There's no kind of concrete leaders, there's no sort of plan for Brexit. There's instability.
I think the issues with the NHS and education, I think that had a lot to do with it as well. I think people don't want cut after cut after cut.
Yeah, I think it's been kind of a very misleading campaign right from the Brexit scenario. I think how that was explained to people and how that campaign was run really wasn't very accurate.
Many thought the youth vote had an impact.
I'm not surprised. For me, it's a baby step towards sanity. I put my hope in the youth vote.
They came out in numbers and that was great, especially the young people.
So the big question, what happens next?
I think it's going to be a kind of case of a slightly informal cross-party coalition in some sense. So
probably have another election.
You think so?
Well, we keep having them pretty frequent, so expect the unexpected.
A mix then of surprise, disappointment and satisfaction. And for once the train made it just on time. Almost as big a surprise as the election result itself. Mike Pearce, ITV News on the Brighton line.
Well, it's fast approaching 22 minutes past 6. Thank you for being there for us. The ITV Evening News continues with the national and the international news at 6:30. Here's Mary Nightingale in Downing Street.
Theresa May's election gamble backfires. A disastrous night means a hung parliament. The Tory leader vows to stay on as Prime Minister in a deal with Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists. Jeremy Corbyn, meanwhile, confounds expectations and gains seats for Labour. It's a bad night for UKIP and the SNP, while the Lib Dems gain 4 more MPs. I'm live in Downing Street with all the details of a dramatic 24 hours. Do join me at 6:30.
Well, let's cross to London. An expert, Adrian Pabst, who is a reader in politics at the University of Kent. Mr. Pabst, thank you so much for talking to us. Now, Oxford, Reading, Canterbury, Brighton, Portsmouth, all university towns and cities. You work with students. Why did they care so much about voting in this election?
Well, one factor was, tuition fees. Labour promised to scrap them, which is very popular with students, and that links also to student debt, which is a huge issue for many, but also just generally the optimism, the hope of the Labour campaign. The Tories have been quite negative. I think Corbyn and the Labour Party offered a much more hopeful perspective for young people, and that's why I think a lot of them registered and turned out to vote.
Does the result tell us anything about how people are feeling about Brexit? Was it a win for Remainers last night?
I don't think the election was a rerun of the referendum. So I think it's much more about, is there another way of doing Brexit that isn't just the hard, total kind of, crashing out of the EU that perhaps the Tories might be bringing about. I think people want to see some pragmatism, some compromise in areas that actually works for the whole country in the different constituencies. So I think it's a warning not to give the Tories a carte blanche on Brexit.
And briefly, where does last night rank when it comes to major political upsets?
Much bigger than 2015, much more, than 1992. This is 1945. This is a realignment back to 2 parties, but both parties are divided and neither can win a majority, so it's uncharted territory.
Adrian Pabst, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, back to our political correspondent, Phil Hornby, live in Downing Street for us now. Phil, at the top of the programme, we said there's been a huge increase this time in the number of people who turned up to vote. Some suggestions it's almost double the norm.
Yeah, a huge increase, particularly among young people. 2 golden rules of elections seem to have been broken this time. One is that campaigns don't really change anything. This campaign does seem to have changed quite a lot. And secondly, as we've been hearing, young people normally don't go out to vote. They did go out to vote yesterday. And that will change, I think, how political parties approach elections in future. And parties like the Tories, whose priority up to now has always been to think more about elderly voters than young voters, because elderly people vote, might have to rethink.
Phil, people used to say Theresa May is a safe pair of hands. They're not saying that today.
Yeah, very timid, very cautious, doesn't like taking risks. This was a spectacular gamble. It was the gamble of her life. There are people criticising her for it today. But in a sense, you can't blame her for doing it. Just go back 7 weeks and put yourself in her shoes. She was way ahead in the opinion polls. Everybody was predicting a massive landslide. It was so tempting for her. So she did take the gamble of her life. And as we know, it's backfired.
Phil, it's all over Twitter, the possibility of another general election this year, if we can possibly stand it. What are the chances of that?
It could happen. It all depends how solid this deal is that she's done with the Northern Ireland MPs. Now, she said today, standing outside the door of number 10 Downing Street, that this government will survive for its full 5-year term. Well, I've not met anybody in Westminster today who believes that that will happen. But even if the government does last for a few years, there are plenty of people here who are saying really that her time is up. And one senior Tory said to me this afternoon he won't be surprised if she's gone before Christmas. And there are other people here who are thinking she could well be gone well before that. So a pretty miserable night for Mr. and Mrs. May back in Downing Street tonight.
Phil, as always, thank you very much indeed. As Phil said there, a miserable night for some, a stormy night for others, and a balmy night indeed for yet other people. What's the actual weather going to be doing? Let's find out. Here he is, Simon Parkin.
It's looking sunny out there. P&O Dover Calais Ferries sponsors ITV Meridian weather.
Good evening. Well, I'm afraid I can't guarantee you full-on beach weather through the weekend, but actually tomorrow isn't looking too bad. Plenty of sunshine around, and it'll be warm in that sunshine as well. Come Sunday, though, things turn a little bit more tricky. Basically, we've got a weak weather front out to the west of us. Won't trouble us tomorrow, but by Sunday it will start to push its way eastwards, and it could bring with it some cloud, perhaps even some patchy rain later on as well. Certainly it will feel fresher behind, and as we start the new week, it will be a bit cooler than we've seen recently. For this evening, though, it's mild. We've got a fair bit of cloud. We'll see some clear spells, any early showers disappearing quite quickly. Through the night, you might just see a little bit of patchy rain developing towards the northwest, but, well, we'll be sleeping through it. And temperature-wise, we're looking at lows of around 13, 14 degrees. So for tomorrow morning, might be a bit of cloud if you're up first thing. Then plenty of blue sky developing, and that's the plan as we head through the rest of the day. In that sunshine, feeling very warm inland, temperatures up to around 20, 21 degrees, 70 in Fahrenheit, fresher along the coast and around the Isle of Wight thanks to the sea breezes. As for your high tide times, you can see in Portsmouth 20 to 1 in the morning, 10 past 1 in the afternoon, and then that weak weather front will come through on Sunday, as I say, bringing some cloud with it and perhaps some patchy rain later.
P&O Dover Calais Ferries sponsors ITV Meridian weather.
Live vividly this summer with the ITV Pollen Count. Sponsored by Pyrenees Hay Fever Relief Nasal Spray.
Of course, there is a downside to fine weather at this time of year, and that's that you might have to suffer with scratchy eyes and sniffles, because as we head through into next week, the grass pollen levels are going to remain very high.
Simon, thank you. Next, our election coverage continues on the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale in Downing Street.
Before we cross to London, let's look back on what an extraordinary day it has been for our politicians, old and new. Nothing went quite as expected, but despite it all, our Prime Minister, Theresa May, clings on to that top job. Interesting days ahead. From all of us here, thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend. We're off for a sleep.
Happy weekend. Bye-bye.
let's get to work.